This is part 17, and in this part we shall be discussing offences against property, for which we will have to deal with chapter 17. And in order to understand this, we will have to start right from section 378 up to section 462 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, the Indian Penal Code takes care of your property. Nobody should deprive you of your property. And hence now, the first group of the section with which we shall be dealing, where there is a person is deprived of his property. And in order to understand this, the first section with which we shall be dealing is section 378 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines the offence of theft. Then, we are not at present discussing ingredients in detail, but take into consideration simple illustration where I have kept book by my side or on the table, and somebody takes away that book without my consent, he is liable for the offence of theft. Rest of the ingredients with which we shall be dealing. But what he has done, he has dishonestly taken that property out of my possession without my consent, and hence what we say, he is liable for the offence of theft. As compared to this, if somebody puts me in fear of injury and compels me to part with the property, somebody gets up and he says, give this book, otherwise I will attack you. And then I say, don't attack me, take away the book, and he has taken away the book, he is liable for the offence of extortion defined by section 383 of the Indian Penal Code. Now, even though the book is given by me, it cannot be said that he has taken that book with my consent, because at the time of understanding section 378 of the Indian Penal Code, we will also try to understand what is this valid consent or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code during course of our lecture. So if somebody deprives me of my property by putting me in fear of injury to me or to any other person, then he is liable for the offence of extortion defined by section 383. Now, while taking the book, if he attacks me and take away the book as far as the first illustration is concerned, or the nature of the fear as far as the second illustration is concerned, in that case, that may amount to the offence of robbery defined by section 390 of the Indian Penal Code. And then if it so happens that the offence of robbery is committed by 5 or more persons, when there is attempt on the part of 5 or more persons to commit the offence of robbery, that amounts to the offence of dacoity defined by section 391 of the Indian Penal Code. So that try to have this approach right in the beginning. When you want to know what do you mean by dacoity, which is defined by section 391 of the Indian Penal Code, by merely reading section 391 of the Indian Penal Code, you shall not be in a position to understand, because what is dacoity? Dacoity is an aggravated form of robbery. So in order to know what do you mean by dacoity, you will have to know what do you mean by robbery, which is defined by section 390 of the Indian Penal Code. And then when you start reading section 390, you come to know in all robbery there is either theft or extortion. What does it mean? Robbery is an aggravated form of either theft or extortion, with which we shall be dealing in detail. So in order to know robbery, you must know what do you mean by theft and what do you mean by extortion, as they are defined by the respective sections of the Indian Penal Code, to which I had just mentioned earlier. So this is, depriving a person of its property determines criminal liability. Now, in a case where my book, I have lost my book, or somebody has taken the book under impression that he is taken my book, or somebody goes to my library and he takes a book with the intention of returning that book to me after he has finished reading of it, but he doesn't, what is his liability? And now Once we start discussing section 403 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines the offence of dishonest misappropriation of property, we will understand if somebody who is what is known as finder of the goods, when somebody has got what is known as an innocent possession or casual possession, and he deprives me of my property, he is liable as far as criminal dishonest misappropriation, or what is known as criminal misappropriation of property, defined by section 403 of the Indian Penal Code. With this now, if I have given my book to somebody with a request that this should be given to my friend or handed over to my friend, but instead of giving to my friend, he has sold out the book or he has converted that book to his own use, what is his liability? Such a person has committed the offence of criminal breach of trust, defined by section 405 of the Indian Penal Code. So there we will try to understand what do you mean by criminal breach of trust as it is defined by section 405 of the Indian Penal Code. With this now, somebody practices deception and compels me to part with the book. That he tells me he is going to return the book tomorrow, and with this I mean he tells me, give me a book, I will return it tomorrow, and he has no intention to return that book in the future. What is his liability? Now here also it can be said that he has not taken that book with my consent, because we will try to understand what do you mean by valid consent during course of time. But then what is his liability? His liability is for the offence of cheating, defined by section 415. So these are the sections. If a person is deprived of his property, the manner in which you deprive a person of his property determines criminal liability. It may be cheating, it may be criminal breach of trust, it may be dishonest misappropriation of property, it may be dacoity, it may be robbery, it may be extortion, or it may be theft. Now during course when we shall be working out details as far as these sections are concerned, we will try to understand whether this offence can be committed with, when you talk about property, the property may be movable property or immovable property, and when we will try to understand as to there are some offences which can be committed only with respect to movable property, there are some offences which can be committed which are with respect to immovable property, there are some offences which can be committed with respect to movable as well as immovable property. What do you mean by movable property? We will have a discussion in detail at the time of discussing the offence of theft by having reference to section 22 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned, which defines movable property. With this now, at times I mean you will come across a term as to what do you mean by stolen property. Now what do you mean by stolen property is defined by section 410 of the Indian Penal Code. And in order to understand the offence in the sense, in order to understand what do you mean by stolen property, you must first of all be in a position to know the offence of theft, the offence of extortion, the offence of robbery, the offence of criminal misappropriation of property, and criminal breach of trust. And then stolen property, what do you mean, is merely defined. But then what is the liability? Receiving or retaining stolen property is made punishable as right from section 411 up to section 414 of the Indian Penal Code, with which we shall be dealing during course of time. So this is first part where we shall, when we talk about a person is deprived of his property, the way in which you deprive a person of his property determines the criminal liability accordingly. With this now, somebody has taken my book and he sets fire to the book. What is his liability? And then once we will start with section 405 of the Indian Penal Code, section 425 of the Indian Penal Code, it defines the offence of mischief. So in case of mischief, what you do? You carry out change in the property or in the situation thereof, which diminishes value or affects it injuriously. So that amounts to the offence of mischief as it is defined by section 4, with which we shall be dealing.
So there is what is known as destruction of the property, carrying out change in the property or in the situation thereof which diminishes its value or affects it injuriously. So if somebody runs away with the book, his liability is for the offence of theft. But if somebody has set fire to the book or has that cut book into 511 pieces, his liability is for the offence of mischief defined by section 425. Mischief can be committed with respect to movable as well as immovable property. And then the way as we proceed to section 425 of the Indian Penal Code, we shall be dealing in detail with the offence of mischief, and then right from section 426 up to section 440 of the Indian Penal Code are the sections which deal with punishment. If somebody commits the offence of mischief, what is the punishment that can be inflicted by the court of law is dealt accordingly. So this is second, as we go on classifying, first group of the sections deals with when a person is deprived of the property. Second, only one section which defines the offence of mischief. And then now with this we come to the last part as far as this chapter is concerned, which deals with immovable property. And then naturally nobody can take away your immovable property. But what is Indian Penal Code? Indian Penal Code is a substantive law. What is substantive law? Substantive law is that law which defines rights, duties and liabilities of an individual. And hence, if it is my piece of land or if it is my house, what is my right? I have got right to have quiet and peaceful enjoyment of the property. If you do an act because of which I am deprived of this right, there starts your liability. Why? Because it is your duty not to deprive me of my quiet and peaceful enjoyment of the property, and hence this is a group of the section with which we shall be dealing right from section 441 onwards of the Indian Penal Code. Now I will proceed in reverse order. And what is the reverse order? Yes, sometimes it is necessary for you to know the offence of housebreaking by night. Now, once I refer to this because at the time of dealing with section 103, when we will deal with general exceptions, when the right of private defense of the property extends to the causing of death, we will refer to right of private defense of the property extends to the causing of death in case of robbery, in case of housebreaking by night. So there, there when we will deal with general exceptions right from section 76 up to 106 of the Indian Penal Code, mind well, you have to remember, unless you know what is housebreaking by night, unless you know what is robbery, it may not be possible for you to understand the general exceptions with which we shall be dealing as soon as we finish with what? This chapter, namely right from section 378 up to section 462, that is firstly, and secondly, we will start dealing offences affecting human body when we will deal with right from section 299 up to section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. So now, what is housebreaking by night? You immediately will go to the index and you will come to know, or when you are dealing with this chapter, section 446 of the Indian Penal Code defines the offence of housebreaking by night. But then what is this housebreaking by night? And then as we will work out details, you will come to know, if the offence of housebreaking is committed by a person after sunset before sunrise, then that amounts to the offence of housebreaking by night. But in order to know the offence of housebreaking by night, which is defined by section 446 of the Indian Penal Code, you must know what do you mean by housebreaking. Because housebreaking by night is an aggravated form of housebreaking which is defined by section 445 of the Indian Penal Code.
So we have to understand what do you mean by housebreaking by night, for which you will refer to section 445. As we shall be dealing the entry or departure by any one of the ways which are enumerated as far as section 445 is concerned is what is known as housebreaking. Yes, no doubt about it. But when you can say somebody is liable for the offence of housebreaking, if somebody commits the offence of house trespass. And to understand the offence of house trespass, you will have to refer to section 442 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines the offence of house trespass. So as we learn the offence of house trespass, which is defined by section 442 of the Indian Penal Code, you will come to know what is house trespass. You can't read section 442 and understand what is house trespass, because house trespass is an aggravated form of criminal trespass. Hence what we will have to do, we must know what do you mean by criminal trespass, which is defined by section 441 of the Indian Penal Code. When we will start discussing what is criminal trespass, which is defined by section 441, we will also try to understand what is the distinction between civil trespass and criminal trespass. Civil trespass is a tort, criminal trespass is an offence, and hence that is defined as far as section 441 is concerned. So to know the offence of housebreaking by night, you must know criminal trespass. Then you must know what is house trespass, you must know what is housebreaking, and ultimately you come to housebreaking by night as it is defined by section 446 of the Indian Penal Code. With this now, sometimes it is also you must know what do you mean by lurking house trespass by night. In order to understand what do you mean by lurking house trespass by night, which is defined by section 444 of the Indian Penal Code, lurking house trespass by night is an aggravated form of lurking house trespass. So in order to know section 444, which defines the offence of lurking house trespass by night, you must know the offence of lurking house trespass, which is defined by section 443. And what is lurking house trespass? Lurking house trespass is an aggravated form of house trespass, and house trespass is an aggravated form of criminal trespass. Hence we will proceed to section 441 of the Indian Penal Code. In order to know, first of all, try to understand what is criminal trespass. Then we will try to understand what is house trespass, when it can be labelled or it amounts to the offence of lurking house trespass, and when lurking house trespass amounts to the offence of housebreaking by night, with which we shall be dealing. So this would be the approach from the point of view of dealing with the chapter with which we intend to have our discussion. But before I start working out details as any one of the sections is concerned, the time for me to draw your attention. And what is that? Once you start reading the section, you have to understand the section by reading along with the section. Section is inclusive of the explanations, so we will have to read the explanations. Now, as soon as you read the explanations, this is the time where you should follow this practice. Do read the illustrations which are given at the end of the section. It is by reading the illustrations, your understanding of the ingredients as far as the section is concerned becomes very clear. That is one thing. And then during course of time, as this I shall be dealing with, no doubt about it. But we have already, I have already told you the importance of general explanations right from section 6 up to section 52A of the Indian Penal Code. During course of time, as you try to know a particular term, as for the purpose of understanding, which are the different terms to which we will come across in order to understand the offence of theft defined by section 378. Homework for you. Theft can be committed with respect to movable property only. So you will have to refer to section 22 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines movable property. theft can be said that person is liable for the offense of theft provided his intention was dishonest at the time of moving the property. What do you mean by dishonesty? We will refer to section 24. In order to understand section 24, you must know what do you mean by wrongful gain and wrongful loss as defined by section 23 of the Indian Penal Code. So this will be the approach. And last but not the least, mind well, you must know what do you mean when you take property with my consent, you are not liable. If you take property without my consent, you are liable. So you want to know what do you mean by valid consent or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code, and then what you will do. Now this I have told you in the past. Whenever you want to know meaning of a particular term which is dealt by the section, you find out whether section explains the same or not, or defines the same or not. And if it is not, you will have to refer to general explanations. If it is not mentioned as far as general explanations are concerned, then you will have to refer to the General Clauses Act of 1897. If it is not so, you will have to refer to any standard dictionary for the purpose of knowing the meaning of it. This is the approach that is required to be followed as a student of law forever. So now you want to know what is consent and what you will do. Naturally, if you take my property without my consent, you are liable. But then what is consent? And hence, to know consent, you will start right from section 6 up to section 52A of the Indian Penal Code, and no section right from section 6 up to section 52A defines what do you mean by consent. But the time for me to draw your attention to only one exception. Now, in order to find out what is definition of the consent is in the negative form, but for that what you will have to do, if you start reading right from section 76 up to section 106, and then if you come to section 90 of the Indian Penal Code, definition of the consent is given in the negative form. So for the purpose of understanding, though I say it is only that you will have to refer to the general explanations, this is an exception where you must master, and that we are going to do right in the beginning, as to know what do you mean by valid consent or the consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code as far as this, because that plays very important role. And once I deal with the consent, I say consent and that's all, nothing more, no more explanation is given. Because when we shall be dealing with section 375 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines the offence of rape, it clearly lays down, if you have got a sexual intercourse with a woman without her consent, that amounts to the offence of rape. But what is this consent? Again, you will have to come back to which section? You will have to know section 90 of the Indian Penal Code, with which we shall be dealing right in the beginning to know the consent. If the act is done with the consent, the question of liability doesn't arise. If the act is done without consent, there starts the liability of an individual, and hence we will try to understand what is valid consent or consent which is intended by the provisions of the Indian Penal Code as far as section 90 of the Indian Penal Code is concerned. And which are the other sections? As you go on reading general explanations, you will try to understand which is the section that you will have to refer to. So this is what is known as cross reference. I will try to correlate the section, and it is only because of if you try to correlate the section and understand the manner in which it is necessary for you to proceed so that you can understand, then only the better purpose is likely to be served. So homework is a must, no doubt about it. Simultaneously, as you go on reading the illustrations which are given, you can have your own illustrations also, no problem. And hence now, this will be the approach that we shall be following, and then for the purpose of starting to understand the manner in which a person is deprived of the property, because of which you will come to know the nature of the offence, in the next part we start discussing section 378 of the Indian Penal Code, which defines the offence of theft.